we're on. We'll just kick it off. Dr. Maryanne Demasi, thank you for coming in, and thank you for all the work you did during COVID as well. It was, I was just saying before that it was an interesting time, and there were only a certain number of people that were doing, I think, some really good work in the space of journalism, and you were one of them. So you get the credential for being based for that, and there's the sign. There you go, straight. And there'll probably be some sort of graphic over the top for that, which is good. But it is true. You are an investigative journalist with a background, a PhD in rheumatology, I think, Adelaide-born and bred, which is another tick. But you've had a very diverse career thus far. You went after being some work in the medical space. You went off and joined the ABC. So trust you're comfortable with all of this here. This is all very non-ABC at the moment, but that's okay. There's a lefty in the room. There's a lefty in the room. That's all right. It just goes to show, there's always a horseshoe effect in politics. So, and it is really, really good to. I think I first started reading your stuff during COVID, but you'd had a long run up before then. You'd been at the ABC. So tell me about that. How did you go from medical research, ministerial advisor, you've done a bit of work in politics, to the ABC?
Someone at the ABC actually reached out to me and asked me if I would join the team. They had a position available. So it didn't really, I was working here at Channel 7 part-time as their medical reporter. So it was really just an extension of that, doing longer form stories. So I packed my bags and left for Sydney.
Moved to Ultimo.
Yeah.
And that was the mid-2000s, something like that?
It was 2005, 2006.
What was it like? What was the ABC like at that stage? Was it, you come in on a particular, journalistic mission, I think you were originally working straight away with Catalyst, the TV show, which is, for people that don't know, science, medicine, and did some really good work in that space.
Yeah, I had a really high opinion of the ABC. It was put up there as a pedestal of independent journalism. I was fully into what the public broadcaster stood for. And I think we were doing good work at the time, particularly the team that I was working with at the ABC. I was on a steep learning curve, as I didn't come from journalism. I came from the science background. So it took me a few years to find my feet, and then I really started getting into the investigative side of it. And of course, that's where the issue started. I started looking into corporate corruption and conflicts of interest within the medical space. And that proved to be problematic for the ABC.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You I think in 2008, 9 and 11, you win the National Press Club. What was the actual award called?
It was the National Press Club Award for Excellence in Journalism.
So, without wanting to put words in your mouth, you're really kicking some goals at this point and doing the stuff that you loved when it came to investigative journalism. And I'm intrigued by that because how do you get a story and then start to unpick it? Do you get a leak, a drop? Someone comes and sees you? Does the ABC facilitate that, or are you out finding stories yourself? Obviously, you curate an interest in a topic somehow. Is it just your own?
I think it's just I'm always background reading medical journals, and issues come up. So in a medical journal, you might read some concerns about the overprescription of cholesterol-lowering medications. So I would set about to do my own research, and then when I thought a story was forming in my mind, that's when I'd pitch it to the ABC, and they'd either give it the green light or just say, no, it needs more work.
Yeah.
So it was just a lot of background reading.
And when you pitch a story, you do it to the department, the team, and you'd say, look, I've got this idea, and then they say, right, go off and do it. But the story must sometimes sort of change. There must be a bit of divergence in the story when you start to get into it. The reason I'm saying that is because you did a very famous story on statins, which was one of the first moments where the bell rang a bit and you started to get a bit of pushback. But just, I'm really interested in that. Take me through that. What started your interest in that area, and how did it play out?
I actually was working on another story about blood pressure and meditation. And I was in the doctor's surgery with one of his patients talking about the benefits of meditation in lowering blood pressure. And this patient at the time had a really, really high cholesterol. And I said to the cardiologist, surely he must be on a cholesterol-lowering medication. And he said, absolutely not. And I thought, that's strange. How could you have a sky-high cholesterol reading and not prescribe a cholesterol-lowering medication? And he said, you really need to look into this. So I did. And it was about 2 or 3 years of reading the medical journals and realizing that actually cholesterol was not the causative agent in heart disease that we all were told it was. So that's how the story came about. I pitched that to the team at the ABC. We red team it a little bit. We think about, who we will interview and who we won't. Of course, the Heart Foundation was pivotal in that story in providing the other side, because they were always talking about the harms of high cholesterol and its causative role in heart disease. And I don't think we realised at the time how controversial it would be until it had actually gone to air.
Yeah. So you've done a 2-year run-up on this. This is just your own interest in building, culminating with the story. It's a long time. You wouldn't research a PhD sometimes for that long.
Yeah.
So you've done a bit of background.
You're working on other stories at the same time, so it just bubbles in the background. But, from start to finish, it was probably a 2 or 3 month journey just at the ABC, because we went overseas, we interviewed people on both sides of the story, and so it was an intense ending before the programs went to air. And that goes through our editorial policy unit, it goes through legal checks. It had all the checks it needed before it went to air.
And as you would expect a fair-minded journalist to do, you went off and got both sides of the story. You spoke to those who would say yay and those who would say nay. So what was the criticism?
The criticism was that the tone of the story was that cholesterol-lowering medications were toxic and that nobody should take them. Of course, that is not what we said at all, but that's how the media characterised it. That's how the drug companies were characterising it. And so it was causing a lot of backlash. Calling the ABC, putting in complaints, and then the ABC then has to investigate these complaints. So it was about 6 months of investigating this program. Did we stick to all the editorial policies that we said we would? And was it as solid as we claimed? So at the end of the 6 months, they came to the conclusion that both programs were factually accurate, but that I had favoured one particular side in a section of the second part of the series. And the recommendation wasn't to retract the stories at all. It was to put more information out there to help people. The irony is that it's never been truer today than it was, when I first did the stories. Cholesterol-lowering medications are still one of the most widely prescribed drugs in the world. And they are still overprescribed. And that was the essence of the story, that it started off as a subgroup of people that might benefit from these medications. And instead of coming out with a new drug, what pharmaceutical industries do usually is to increase the indications of the drug. So they've got a small subset of people that benefit, and then they're like, well, let's try and get, instead of the people that are with established heart disease, let's get healthy people to take the drug. And then they were like, well, hey, maybe we can give this drug to people who don't even have high cholesterol. And then they were like, maybe we can give it to children as a preventative. And it got to the point where they were actually having debates about putting statins in the water supply. They were saying it's so safe and so effective, we could put it in the water supply. So effective. That was kind of the journey that I went on in those few years of researching the story.
Was that an eye-opener? Were you sort of live to, with a bit of background in medicine, was that the moment where you thought, hang on a sec, this is,
When I first realised that the cholesterol threshold for prescribing a statin was about 6.5, it started off 6.5 millimoles per litre. And then they just continually kept lowering the threshold. So overnight, with no extra science, no extra clinical trials. They were just lowering the threshold, and then millions more people would become eligible for medications just by changing the definition of high cholesterol.
It wasn't the end of it, though. You then, so we're talking at that stage about 2000 and, what is that, 12, 13, something like that.
2013.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of flack. I mean, I had a terrific team at the lower level. It was really just sort of ABC executive that was very cautious about this not happening again. So we decided to just continue doing great stories. We put our heads down, and I did stories about the big chemical industry and big food, big sugar, and we just kind of kept poking the bear.
These strike me as being ABC stories, you know, like, I mean, we were talking before about how some of these issues have, you know, were originally left-wing issues, you know, left-wing issues that now become more accepted, and we don't know what the handle. I struggle with that as well, but you would think that they'd be the sort of things they'd be into. You did one later on.
So the last one I did, I came across the story about wireless devices and Wi-Fi, and it was really quite a mild story. When I look back on it, I think we didn't really say anything about the health risks of mobile phones that's not already in your mobile phone as a warning from the manufacturer. And we were super careful to keep the tone right. We didn't have somebody in the story that developed a brain cancer from excessive mobile phone use because we thought that might be too emotive. We were like finicky about the kind of music that we'd use so that we wouldn't be too dramatic. And it was fact-checked within an inch of its life. I don't think that there's ever been a documentary that ever went to air at the ABC that had that much scrutiny. And then, you know, the telecommunications industry, just...
Big telco got you.
Yeah, big telco. Who would have thought they were more powerful?
They've got a good run-up. They've got a lot to... And this was the one I think that got a run on Media Watch as well. Was that...
I had...
You already had a run-in with a few...
I had a few run-ins with Media Watch.
The whole point of the exercise is to argue the case from both sides. Yeah. It feels like it's a long time ago that used to happen, and used to happen in a sort of mainstream fashion. It seems to be all being done now by the independent media, of which you're one. But, you know, this concept of trust the science, you know, it's sort of, that is the mantra now, isn't it? It's like, this is the way we do it, and don't veer off the lanes. I suspect it was always there, but the industries have grown bigger. But do you think that's, I mean, do you think particularly with the ABC that got progressively worse?
Yeah. I think it did. I just don't remember. I mean, I hardly watch the ABC anymore. It's just become unwatchable to me. I tried to persist after Catalyst was disbanded in the end of 2016. I tried to persist with watching the program, and it kind of became unwatchable. But I did notice a real change. It went from really trying to question the narrative to then we have to support the narrative. We have to support government policies. Yeah. It was really strange.
Yeah. There's probably an answer to that, but we won't know. But it does have very much the feel of state-run media now.
I think there was just a lot of pressure from government that was felt within the ABC, that if they were picking on policies or questioning certain things, that they would get if funding jeopardised and cut out the loop. So then it really shifted from questioning authority to then really just being the mouthpiece for authority.
You sort of, as you say, you didn't come in with a background in journalism, you came a background in medical science. So, you know, maybe it's a difficult question to answer, but I feel like that's the case with journalism generally now in the mainstream. Is it's become so competitive, and there are so many outlets, and there's such competition to get a story up quickly, that the best you can do is take a media release from the government department, transcribe it, put some pictures in it and whack it up on the website.
Yeah.
Whereas the old days of journalism were doing exactly what you were describing, which was spending time. You had more time up your sleeve. It feels like that to me. It feels like journalism now has become, in many respects, very much just transcribing rather than actual, sort of digging and reporting. Do you think,
I remember one of my first memories of seeing the change was reading the Sydney Morning Herald on a Tuesday morning, and I felt that all the stories were really just what happened on television the night before.
Yeah.
And I thought, that is so strange, because I was used to sourcing and finding my own stories and creating story ideas. And it was just kind of felt like it was just more commentary and reporting on what had happened on TV the night before. That was probably my first real awakening to how journalism was changing. And now it's become very opinionated. There's a lot more there's a lot more commentary. And I mean, it's fine if it's an op-ed, but a lot of it is commentary disguised as journalism.
Yeah, you're spot on. It used to be one section. There was one opinion piece per paper. Now it's the whole lot. Yeah. And I mean, it's almost as though each outlet has its lane now. Well, I don't feel like, maybe I was just not paying attention or I was too naive, but each outlet has its own, has its own audience, but it also has its own barrier to push as well. There are some that are kind of, tools of the establishment and, the kind of the military wing. And then there are those that are, the sort of the inner city kind of well-to-do, Sydney types. And then there is, the equivalent in Melbourne and here in Adelaide. Well, I don't know what you'd call it, but anyway.
Yeah. I think they know their audiences and they'll speak to their audiences.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they need the ratings. And if they don't get the ratings, they don't get the advertising. And that, people used to say, oh, the ABC is not about ratings. But it absolutely was.
Yeah.
We didn't have commercials or influence, but there was a sense that if we're not rating highly, then people aren't watching us and we're not doing our job properly.
And you've got an annual report to put out every year, so you need figures.
Yeah, so they needed to stay relevant. So it was absolutely about the ratings.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so that you drop hands with the ABC in 2016. 16, right. So you've got kind of 3 years in between then and COVID. What were you doing between then? And
I was working for the Nordic Cochrane Centre. I was doing some research. We were publishing papers, so I was kind of getting back into medical research, and then also still doing the occasional freelance article that I would publish with Michael West Media. He would take some of my work. So it was just really plodding along, trying to find work in mainstream media was just really difficult for me because I was so radioactive. And even if there was somebody willing to take a chance on me, it was just that the blowback that they couldn't deal with. It was just like,
like it's a vision of my future to come.
Radioactive.
I'm going to use it. But you were actually then as best placed as anyone was for COVID, in a sense. You were ready to go then because you'd sort of, you'd seen the kind of the bad side of all of the things that we just described, which was probably the perfect storm coming up. So, in early 2020, you hear the story that, there's a pandemic brewing. What was your initial reaction to hearing this story about a virus coming out of a wet market in Wuhan? The pangolin getting the bad rap, by the way. Pangolin was framed.
Yes. I didn't know much about it because, respiratory viruses and pandemics weren't my thing. I spoke to a few people. They seemed to be really concerned about it. But I remember one of the earliest articles I read was from John Ioannidis, Stanford professor, who said, let's just calm down. Calm down. Let's not implement policies that will cause damage further down the track or collateral damage. Let's not do something if we don't have the data. And I thought that was a perfectly reasonable thing to say and publish. And he just, got absolutely decimated.
Got obliterated for it.
And so throughout 2020, I kept my ear to the ground about the COVID vaccine. So I was watching and observing that from very early on. And one of my first articles I wrote was, let's not rush a COVID vaccine because this is going in people's arms. And I found that really difficult to get published.
Yeah, I bet. Where were you trying to get it published? Everywhere.
Mainstream media.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was not going to fly. So I ended up publishing it on my own website, and that's kind of how I just ended up becoming an independent journalist. I started my own website. I now run a Substack, Maryanne Demasi Reports, and I have the freedom now to do the stories that I want to do, and not confined by these really narrow editorial guidelines that I used to be.
Because I feel like a lot of journalists now, certainly I don't talk to many of them, but for good reason. But I find that when I do and when I have over the years, they've all thought that they're Woodward and Bernstein. Like I'm going to crack a big story, and it's like only if your boss says so, champ. You're not going to do it if you don't. There is this sort of almost gilded cage in which you have to operate in that forum, and I think that'd be the hardest thing to do. Obviously, you weren't one of those people, and you said, "I'm here to write stories. I'm going to do it." Which is a very, very good thing to do. But that, there's this kind of perception that you can write what you want. And I used to say to a couple of them during COVID, I tell you what, I'll give you a couple of, great stories and try and introduce you to a few interesting people, and you could win a Walkley out of this. And, I don't know, if I get that printed and, so on and so forth. In fact, I had a couple of op-eds that I had during that time when I found myself, into a Medi hotel in the end of 2021, and the response generally was, we can't print that. And it's all just stuff that was true. Vaccine doesn't stop transmission. What are we doing? How can you force people to take it? So there just clearly was not a willingness. And it does, I think, highlight the frailties. And it feels like, for want of a better way of putting it, legacy media or whatever is just kind of in these last sad death throes of existence. So the future to me is the independent media space. I feel like it hasn't quite found its lane yet, but the Substack phenomenon was perfect timing, wasn't it? And Substack actually hadn't been around for a very long time prior to COVID, and it gave a home to people like you who are doing such great stuff. Podcasts, John Ioannidis went on all the big podcasts and told the story, and it's been proven right. Many others did. What do you see as the future of that space of journalism? Do you think has it found its lane yet? There's always going to be a place for people thrashing out stories, telling the truth, which, you've done so well. But, it can be quite lucrative. It can be quite profitable. It can also just be a labour of love. But, is the future in that, style of publishing, do you think?
I think a lot of the independent journalists that are working at the moment, I think the vast majority are doing it as a labour of love. You get the really successful ones like Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi. They get a lucky break, and all of a sudden it's thousands of people signing up. But I think for the vast majority, it's not something that can sustain them. There's definitely a hunger for independent journalists. But at the moment, I think it's really fragmented. And you've got to go to a lot of different journalists to get a lot of different things. So I mainly focus on medical science issues, but maybe somebody wants to read someone that focuses on political issues or environmental issues. So then you find yourself trying to support all the different kinds of journalists, and you think $5 or $6 a month is not that much, but then if you've got 10 people you're supporting, it starts to add up. So
it's like it's streaming services, isn't it? Like somehow music has found two main platforms, Apple and Spotify. And for some reason, video has been broken up into about 16 different platforms, all of which add up. So there's an opportunity there, I reckon. And what you're describing actually is like what you would have had if newspapers hadn't existed 100 years ago. You just have someone talking about medical issues and someone talking about environmental issues. But and maybe we're giving away that. Maybe this is the great business idea that we haven't thought about. Like people have tried, but there's got to be a way of circling the fence and putting a publication in front of people that covers all these, but with proper journalism. It just feels like it hasn't quite found it yet. But
I think the proper journalism, the journalism, it takes time and it's costly, and if you're doing stuff that I'm doing, like putting in freedom of information requests, they're not just costly, but they get dragged out.
And you can end up before the courts.
So, or they end up redacted and just completely useless. So, I think a lot of people have tried to start new independent newspapers, but it's a hard slog.
It's hard, and there's not the market in Australia for it as much as there is in the US, where there are different, the Daily Wire or whatever it is. There's some conglomerates that do a bit of that work, but it's hard here. So, but anyway, I mean, I don't personally, really genuinely don't read much of the, sport maybe, but even that I'm finding triggering. So there's not much more to say about it. But COVID as an interesting tag point. As I said, you I think did. I think this was just before COVID. You did a piece for the British Medical Journal talking about funding and the way in which the Therapeutic Goods Association, the TGA,
that was actually smack bang in
was right in the middle of it. Yeah,
because 2022.
2022. Yeah. So you did it, and it really, really, really showed the power of independent journalism, because it went far and wide. Like, people overseas were talking about, and they talk about this stat. I heard it, I can't remember where I heard it raised the other day, but I heard it in something I was listening to. And I said, oh, that's Maryanne's stat, which you found out, which was that the TGA, 96% of their funding comes from the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
So just tell us about that.
So I did this investigation looking at 6 of the major drug regulators internationally. I think generally people think drug regulation, it's a little bit dry and people's eyes glaze over. But I think once you understand that the drug regulator is the only agency that stands between you and a medicine that you put in your mouth that could potentially kill you, you realize just how important this agency is and how important their independence is. So we looked at the 6 major drug regulators, and in 2022, the TGA came the top of the scale. 96% of its funding, as you say, came from industry. And most people recognise that as a conflict of interest, although the TGA maintains that it's not. They say it's merely a cost recovery system where the drug company pays us a fee and then we approve or disapprove their drug in kind.
And 94% are approved.
Right. So 94% of new drug applications that pass the desk of the TGA are approved, and 20% of all drugs that are approved through expedited pathways, these provisional pathways. And these are sort of fairly new pathways. I think the FDA in the US has about 4 expedited pathways, but they were introduced because there are circumstances where there are rare diseases or people with cancer
who don't have
drugs.
the time for the 10-year process. Right.
So the agency's willing to approve the drug on the basis that they will look carefully and monitor carefully the pharmacovigilance data, and that's the basis of which the COVID vaccines were approved. They were provisionally approved, even though you would hear public health officials say, these vaccines have been approved and deemed to be safe and effective. They missed out the provisional part of it quite often. And these expedited pathways, there's a balance between speed and harm. And we know from the US that products that are approved through expedited pathways often have more safety issues and are more likely to get black box warnings and are more likely to be pulled off the market.
Which is less of an issue if you're going to die of cancer in 2 years.
But with a vaccine, you're giving this to billions of healthy people. And it's really quite a risky thing to do, to not have any medium to long-term data on a platform like mRNA vaccines, which was a brand new platform. And they'd been studying it for 10, 15 years, but they just really couldn't bring it to a human clinical trial with any success until COVID. So, that to me is really quite strange. And that's why in that first year of the pandemic in 2020, I was looking at the speed with which they were trying to get this vaccine through the approval system. And it was just ringing alarm bells to me, right, left and centre.
Yeah, I mean, of course, most of us, and even me included, I didn't understand the difference between an mRNA vaccine and a, sort of a live virus or, whatever it may be. But now it's clear The interesting thing about that is there is meant to be a process for pharmacovigilance after the provisional approval. And a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Julie Sladden, has been doing some work with a colleague of hers on FOI with the TGA, not having much success. You've recently written about this, which is really interesting. But in essence, we still can't find out what sort of pharmacovigilance the TGA have done on these products. What's the background to that? That was a really interesting story on your Substack, most recent one.
Dr. Sladden and other researchers, myself, we've just been trying to see if the TGA is doing what it's legally bound to do, which is monitor adverse events after they've provisionally approved a product to go out to millions of people. So that particular FOI was to obtain a document for the implementation of this supposed rigorous pharmacovigilance process. And the TGA did nothing but stall and then say the documents didn't exist, and then the Information Commissioner intervened, and then they admitted, oh, well, we have 2,200 pages of it. And it's just going back and forth and back and forth. And it's been a battle for 3 years just to get the TGA to admit that they have this documentation. There have been other FOIs looking for cancer rates after the vaccination, and the TGA said they don't exist. And another colleague of mine asked for the animal pregnancy data that the TGA had, and they just got all these mechanisms for stalling and obfuscating or returning documents that are fully redacted and then just completely useless. And the TGA uses this Section 47 in the Act, which says that we can't give you this information because it's commercial in confidence.
Yeah. That's one of 7. Everything you've just described are the standard sort of tactics for avoiding.
But of course, like, the information that they're not giving you is safety data. I mean, there's no trade secrets in safety data.
No.
I asked for the mRNA, the RNA stability data testing that the TGA did for the mRNA vaccines, and same thing. It's commercial in confidence. We're not going to give you the information. So it's a really, really frustrating process.
Yeah, it's as I said, we do a lot of FOIs out of this office, and it's the same process. It's the scope of your request is too wide. This is from all agencies, by the way. It's not just unique to one. And then we have 342 billion documents which fit that category, and the cost associated with this will be $722 trillion. And then, too many man hours, person hours, sorry. And so on and so on. And it goes on. And I think, and to a certain extent, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I get it. Like, you would get a lot of that. There's a lot of work and a lot of sympathy for the FOI officers in those businesses. But ultimately, the system either works or it doesn't. There has to be a way of getting this information. And people have fought, we tried to get the contracts through this to give you any comfort through the Senate process, and that didn't work either. So because we didn't have the numbers, nobody seems to want to know about even people that claim in politics to be all about transparency, you don't want to know about transparency. It's been a very, very difficult but illustrative period, I think, in Australian history and world history. The COVID period, it certainly lit my eyes up in terms of things that I've become interested in. There's a whole host of them as well, and I often wonder now what I've been doing on a personal note with chemicals, cleaning products around the home. As you say, the Wi-Fi, I think that's a very legitimate question around the home.
It doesn't take much to just turn the Wi-Fi off.
No, except getting out of bed, which I don't want to do. So, but it's and then getting out of bed in the morning when it's cold. But is there anything sort of things you're looking at now that you think are going to be problems down the track that we're not thinking about at the moment? I'm really interested in some of the additives in products. Like, for example, I think there's an increased awareness about sunscreens. And
nanoparticles.
Like and some of the chemicals that are in all sorts of things. I'm much more cautious than I was. This might be the silver lining to the COVID. We're understanding that we're perhaps not as protected as we thought we might be. But is there anything that's triggering your interest at the moment that's not kind of medical related or, vaccine related, or that we need to expose today?
Yeah. I've kind of I was investigating plastics and leaching into our water. I was looking at the food industry, dietary guidelines. I mean,
I think a lot of this will come up in the next period.
I think RFK in the US is
What's your take on all of that? What's your take on him? What's your take on the Make America Healthy Again, Maha?
Yeah, I think that it's long overdue, and it's something that I don't know why we're not doing it in Australia, but it's good that he's managed to get this in the national conversation.
Yeah, I don't know where it leads, and I haven't had a chance yet to read some of the early stuff that's coming out. But, at the very least, the question about vaccines as a general concept and the understanding of how limited the testing and the placebo trials and all were, I worry that we're going to learn things that we don't want to hear. We need to learn them, but I feel like this process is going to play out interestingly, and it's he's a brave man to take on the big end of town like that. Do you think we're going to see more and more concerning news out of the vaccine industry generally?
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, we assume that we have all the data, but it's really been the CDC that's controlling a lot of the information that we got about vaccines and the clinical trials. I didn't look into this. It just wasn't my area. And it's only now that RFK has been raising these issues. I wasn't aware that all the childhood vaccines hadn't been tested against a saline inert placebo.
No.
And I didn't think about the fact that, we give so many vaccines all at once in one visit. They haven't actually been tested in combination. So there are all sorts of things that I'm looking into now. I knew a fair bit about ultra-processed foods and high-sugar diets. I mean, I was doing that at the ABC. But he's even getting into the environmental issues and water fluoridation. I think this is all really stuff that we need to reassess.
Yeah, of course we do. And it's interesting that even saying it out loud becomes even more radioactive. We're all, I get called all sorts of things all the time. But it makes more sense when you understand the money behind each one of those industries that you've mentioned. The other interesting phenomenon for me that came out of COVID were the agitators. And you knew when you were onto something when a particular agitator from either on social media or on Twitter or YouTube would start coming at you. And that is a really interesting phenomenon. There is very clearly in my mind more to the paid lobbying industry than we realise. It's not just people that come and knock on your door. It's also those that seek to discredit more publicly. Did you have a lot of that coming your way during the various periods? I mean, I suppose you would have seen something early in the statin time, but, were there particular individuals that were sort of vocal that you thought, that's a bit, you're unusually passionate about this issue?
Yeah. Usually the people that are self-proclaimed debunkers, misinformation sleuths, they tend to they tend to be those types of people, and I was getting that before COVID. But I've noticed probably lately, not so much for myself, but if there are academics that speak out against, say for the COVID vaccine, for example, there seems to be a real orchestrated, concerted effort to try and discredit the academic. And it might be to try and get his papers retracted from the journals. It gets tagged into universities. They demand that the university disciplines the academic. So there's definitely sort of a group of people with a vested interest who are paid by somebody. I mean,
Is that what it is? Do you think it's just simply money, or is it a cultural phenomenon, or is it a combination of both? Because, I mean, people have never worn their tribal political colours on their chest as much as they have recently. There used to be a time where people could debate these things, and, there was a time when I would watch the ABC, probably around the time you're talking about with some of the early stages of Catalyst. I would have sat down and watched, and I did sit down and watch some of those shows because it felt like the issues were getting thrashed out. But we seem to have degenerated into name calling now, which feels very inorganic to me. But maybe it's not. I don't know. Do you think it's maybe a cultural phenomenon as well?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I definitely think that there are organisations out there that understand we can use these people to get our message across. It's just a way of shaping the narrative. I mean, it used to be just a direct lobbying to some executive at the ABC.
Yeah.
Then it was, maybe we'll establish a skeptics organisation. And they do really the opposite of fact-checking became a thing. And so now that they just reel in people, will give you $5 if you just spend a bit of time trolling these people and trying to discredit them.
Yeah.
And it's all under the guise of, we're trying to clear up the misinformation.
Yeah.
We're trying to protect the public.
Yeah.
So maybe these people don't even know that they're useful idiots.
I wonder about that as well.
Yeah.
I noticed, very interestingly, around the time of the changeover in Syria, and the Assad regime, which presumably, I'm sure, is not a good regime, and whatever it may be, I don't know much about it. But I noticed the stream of YouTubers that went to Damascus all of a sudden, and they all did the same thing. They went to the same prison. They talked about the same Captagon factories. They talked. It just all seemed very orchestrated. When you look, the first one was very interesting, because I quite like those shows. So and I realised, there was another one that did the same thing, went to the same places and then the same one. And of course, when you sit back and think about it, it's not that hard. And people are probably listening to going this, of course, you idiot. Of course, people have been doing that for years. But it is hard to pick. It is hard to pick when you've got this kind of industry of, a different form of advertising that's not, it's not new. So, that is clearly the case in some of these. And COVID was the ultimate of that, I suppose. But I don't know if you, through the COVID period, specifically, ever, I don't know, was there ever a time where you felt uncomfortable with some of the, was the vitriol, was it just kind of academic based stuff, or was it ever more than that?
I think I experienced the most discomfort when I was at the ABC. And it was probably because I was in a position and I had a platform that the attacks were egregious and aggressive. I think becoming an independent journalist, you just don't have the same platform, the attacks aren't as severe.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel it, but I certainly saw it happen to people like Martin Kuldoff and Jay Bhattacharya.
Yeah.
And even John Ioannidis getting death threats or threats to the family. So it's kind of nice to see that they have triumphed, and Jay Bhattacharya, the head of NIH. And Asim Malhotra is now, I think, one of the directors of one of those institutes as well, who's somebody known to both of us. A lot of people that were very vocal in that period now have got some opportunities, I think, to make a difference. And they're all people that stood out and rose above the noise, which is a very unique thing. It's something you did as well. Yeah.
What is it?
People ask me all the time.
What is it?
Why?
What is it? Yeah. Well, there's something inherent in people that push against the tide, and it probably isn't something that you're aware of. But do you have any insight into that? It would have been all too easy to say, "Oh, whoops, sorry about that show on statins. I'll just do stories about climate change from now on," and whatever else they're talking about on the ABC right now, something.
I often get asked that. I really don't know what it is. I think it's just some internal glitch that I just can't turn a blind eye.
Don't like being told what to do.
Well, I can't turn a blind eye to a story that's not the truth, or trying to get towards the truth. We don't really know what the truth is. I saw that as my job, and if I wasn't doing that, then I wasn't really doing my job. So as much as I thought I'd try and comply, there's just something inside me that didn't.
Well, I think this is what COVID did. It did show us that there are people out there that will do the right thing regardless of the cost. And it's pretty important, I reckon. And I reckon it's shown, there is still some hope out there. So thank you for doing all of that, and for the work you're doing. And here's to the future of independent journalism and independent politics, in a sense. I shouldn't say that, came out wrongly, but we need it in all sectors. So, congratulations.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.